May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, doing our bit to help preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, Frank Kilmer. Frank he studied at the San Francisco Zen Center with Richard Baker. Oh yeah, he got his first meditation with Chogyam Trungpa, Tail of the Tiger in Vermont. He was with Katagiri for a while. He sat with Maureen Stewart, and he sat with studied with John Terrence and with Tibetan teachers, and I forget their names. And he was for years involved with them. He is a plumber and sort of a site manager. He did that for a big place in California, sort of a spiritual center that Melody Haller was trying to put together with her husband Paul, but that didn't work out. But then he became the sort of the manager of Upaya in Santa Fe. He did that for some years. When I'd go to Santa Fe, I'd see him, and I'd stay with a friend there, Melissa Savage, and Frank would come over and fix her plumbing, and we'd see each other. And Willem Malton would come with us. And Frank talks about Ted, that's Ted Howell. He mentions his last name some. And with Tayo Lipscomb, I can't remember Tayo's Christian name, his given name. It's been Tayo so long. Anyway, I can remember visiting with the three of them sometimes, which was always neat. Anyway, so that's pretty good. Frank and I go on quite a bit. He's got quite a lot of interesting stuff to say about Buddhism and practice and teachers. And, we get into a certain amount of Zen gossip and just talking about, life and everything. And I cut a bunch of it out. We went over 3 hours talking. But I think you'll enjoy it. So when you hear the bell, if you're of such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll be here to hit the ball and end the meditation or whatever, and we'll give Frank Kilmer a call.
Hey, David.
Hey, Frank, how you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to hear your voice. How are you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good to hear your voice. In Santa Fe.
Been a while.
In Santa Fe,
Indeed.
right?
Still in Santa Fe, indeed.
Wow.
Well, it's been a lovely sunny day here. Warm summer. Are you having a sunny day in your neck of the woods?
I think it is. Let me see. It is. It's been overcast some in the last few days, and it's unseasonal We had some unseasonal rain, but that happens every year for a few days or something. It's
and you guys are still in Bali, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, indeed. So,
so my friend, how can I help you?
Just tell me what you're up to.
What I'm up to? Well, happily retired, basically. As you probably know from Ted, still kind of nibbling around the edges of Zen Center stuff.
Yeah.
And he and I went up to Crestone for Richard Baker's kind of, semi-final event. And that was really, really interesting. I imagine Ted described it to you. That was pretty extraordinary.
Well, tell me what was extraordinary about it. Forget about what I've heard.
Okay. Well, Richard Baker back in the day, when we were all, you were a senior person, and, you and, Dan Welch and, Reb, and, you guys were basically Richard's peers.
Nah. Nobody's his peer. Suzuki Roshi, okay. Mumon Yamada, but we were higher up in the pecking order. I agree.
Yeah, indeed.
We have more seniority. We have more seniority.
Right. Ted and I were, middle management, basically.
Yeah.
And, we were work leaders and tenzos and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And my relationship with Richard was rather cool, but in a lot of ways he was a good teacher for me, and I loved the opportunity to be at Zen Center.
Yeah.
And meet interesting people. One thing that I did recently, David, you might be curious about is there's a book that was published recently called Tripping on Utopia.
Yeah.
And it's a biography of Margaret Mead, Gregory Bateson, and their involvement with LSD and with the CIA.
Cool.
It's a very far out book. It was written by a history professor at UC Santa Cruz, where Gregory's library is, and where all of these unpublished papers and stuff are. So it's a very interesting book. And, for instance, I met Gregory and studied with him because of Zen Center, because he was a Lindisfarne fellow and was part of that, Richard Baker cultural umbrella that we got to be, participants in to a degree.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what was amazing about being in Crestone, and, I would say this to Richard's face. First off, he was extremely friendly, and I would say even deferential to Ted and I.
Yeah.
He didn't quite treat us as peers, but definitely as fellow practitioners.
Yeah. Yeah.
And particularly in the conversations that we had with the German, filmmakers that you know about.
Yeah.
He was, I would say, David, he was insecure. There was a lot of self-doubt, a lot of self-pity.
Uh-huh.
And I found myself saying things like, well, gee, Richard, you had a rough situation. You stepped up in a lot of ways. You got Zen My Beginner's Mind published, yada, yada. And he seemed kind of shocked to be complimented or to be encouraged in that way.
Yeah.
It was a massive reversal of that, kind of foreboding, master of the territory sort of persona that he had back in the day.
Yeah. 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 Oh, my relationship with him in recent decades is very different from when he was the abbot of Zen Center. And it has gotten more and increasingly more comfortable. I'm going there to Germany I'm leaving in late August, but I'll be there. Mm-hmm. I'll be there for a month, and I'll be there for the for him to step down from being Abbott and Nicole Baden to step up. And
that's great. I'm so glad. I'm really glad you're going, and I'm really glad that Ted is going as well.
You could go.
I could, but I'm not.
Yeah. I like
a good
being
time for
there.
me to go to Europe, but
yeah, that's the only place since we came to Bali, going on 11 years ago. The only place outside of Asia I've been is Johannesburg, and
is that right?
Well, Germany a little. I went over to Vanya's place, Felsentor, and spent time with him. And well, I went over there with Richard, and yeah, it was cool. And he and Vanya and I spent time together, and we all went to Felsentor together. And he'd never been there before. And then when they left, I said, "I'm staying here," and so I stayed there 3 days.
Nice.
But I was glad to get back at Felsentor, and I mean at Johannesburg. That's where I'm really comfortable.
Nice. Well, and I'm curious. I look forward to a visit with Nicole at some point. I'd like to meet her and find out what she's about. But anyway, so kind of going in reverse. So that was an interesting event. And
yeah. Let me say one thing about.
Let
me say one thing about
What's
Nicole.
That,
Let me say one thing about Nicole. Listen to the podcast with her. It'll blow your mind, man. She's really cool. Just go to the podcast page on Cuke.com and do a page search, for Nicole or Baden.
Cool.
And listen to that. She's really cool. I really like her.
Good. That's good to hear. And it's impressive to me that Richard chose a woman to be his, official, predecessor or follower.
Yeah.
Taking the seat. So anyway, but going in reverse. So I retired, a few years ago. I still do a little consulting and work on the side, but basically my time is my own. And so, some years ago, I don't know if, I remember meeting you here in Santa Fe, God, probably around, I don't know, maybe 2010 or so, something like that. There was a house that was near Jones Place, the Upaya. I remember seeing you. Anyway, so my sequence was, so I was at Upaya. I was managing Upaya from 2003 to 6.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so, and I got to know the inside story about Joan. And, there's a lot of things about Joan that are great, and there's some things that are, not so great. But isn't that true of all of us? So anyway, so I left there, and I was with a gal who wanted to go to India. So she and I went to India together and traveled around and, went to the Taj and various places, and it was great. I'd been there before. But then we went to Dharamsala. And in Dharamsala, through a series of events, I met a young Tibetan monk who fairly soon before that had escaped from Tibet, did the cruise out over, the snowscape and whatever. And my girlfriend wanted to go see him because his reputation was he was tall and handsome, and I wasn't so interested, but we ended up going. And it turned out that is the 17th Karmapa. So he's the head of one of the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And so there's this.
What about the other Karmapa?
Well, I mean, there's some controversy, but, anyway, the guy that I met is, as far as I'm concerned, that's the Karmapa. And, there's this Indian word, darshan. That? Are you familiar with that term?
Sure.
Okay. So to me, darshan is basically the field that a teacher generates. And if you're receptive to it and you're within that field, you can access maybe unusual states of consciousness that might not ordinarily be available to you. So anyway, so he came in to give his talk, and I found myself in a really unusual state. And it was a repeat of a couple other experiences that I'd had, one of which was when the Dalai Lama came to Green Gulch many years ago. I don't know if you were around San Francisco at that point.
Yeah.
So the Dalai Lama, came to give a tour of the Bay Area. And, at that time he hadn't won the Nobel Prize and people were worried about his safety with the Chinese and whatever. So he stayed at Green Gulch.
Right. For 2 weeks.
And some of us who were, 2 weeks, yeah. And some of us who were doing practice period at Tassajara, Richard asked us to come up to Green Gulch to be, like a presence. So we did that, and that was fine. And then the last day that HH was there, he asked Richard, your students have been so great. Is there anything I can do to thank them? And bless his heart, Richard said, give them a talk. So the Dalai Lama gave a Dharma talk in the Dharma Hall at Green Gulch in the Zendo. And I was there. And the same thing happened in the sense that I entered a really not common state of consciousness in his presence. And I suspect that for whatever reason, the Tibetans are better at doing that than some other schools, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I came back to Santa Fe, and I had an interview with him through a series of events, and was nose to nose with him and had an interaction, and it was like, oh boy, here we go. And the very first teacher that I ever received meditation instruction from was Trungpa.
Oh.
At his place in Vermont, at Tail of the Tiger.
No
and that
kidding.
Was in, I think that was in 76, 77, right, 76. And that was before I started practicing Zen. And so that was the original instruction I had. I was really impressed with Trungpa, but it was too crazy for me. It was too chaotic.
Right.
Which is why I defaulted to Zen practice instead. So I went to Minneapolis and was at Katagiri's place for a year. And then the first time I ever sat down with him, he said, "So have you been to San Francisco Zen Center yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, you should go there." I said, "Well, I hear this funny stuff about this guy, Richard Baker." He said, "Yeah, don't worry about that stuff. Just go." So I stayed.
What year was that?
For
What year?
77. And so I stayed there for a year, and then I went to Green Gulch. I was at Green Gulch for 6 months as kind of an extended guest student in 77. Then went to the city center for 6 months, and then went to Tassajara for 7 practice periods, 78 to 82. So that was my time frame. So anyway, so I came back to Santa Fe. So now the context is like 2006, 7, right in that zone.
Yeah.
And I kept finding myself circling back to Tibetan practice. And so I looked around. It turned out there was this young Indian-born daughter of a Tibetan teacher who was coming to Santa Fe to give teachings. And her name is Khandro, Jetson Khandro Rinpoche. And so I went to her talk. We had an interaction. I liked her. And I started practicing with her. She had a little community here in Santa Fe. And she came once a year and would stay for about a month and give various teachings and then go back to India. And so she had a student here whose name was Peter Lieberson. And Peter Lieberson was a senior student of Trungpa's back in the day. And he was a professional musician, and he wrote operas. And he came to Santa Fe to have a performance of a Buddhist opera called Ashoka's Choice. That was performed first time here at the Santa Fe Opera. So he came to Santa Fe, fell in love with the primary singer, and they moved in together and got married in Santa Fe. So he became Khandro, this Tibetan woman's primary contact and teacher here in Santa Fe. And he was a wonderful man, an unusual person in so many ways. So he was the on-site person who gave meditation instruction and taught classes and did various things here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to know him pretty well. And Khandro, although she's a full-on nun, totally celibate her whole life, completely committed, but not, she could see beyond the traditions in the sense that I came along. I was outside of her lineage. I was outside of all of her stuff, but we connected. And she ended up giving me actually a lot of responsibility. So I don't know how aware you are of Tibetan stuff. I know you met Trungpa at one point. But in traditional Tibetan practice, there's a practice called Nundro that's usually translated as a preliminary practice. And so Nundro practice is what you do, in the Khandro lineage, at least of Tibetan Buddhism. The way they describe it is that we're all complete in our original nature, all of us. However, most of us have obscurations. So it's like having your vision obscured by like a cataract or something. So the preliminary practices are designed to remove those obscurations. And so the first practice, there's 4 practices, and the first one is 108,000 prostrations to the floor.
Yeah.
And that's, a lot of people know about that. But the thing is, we throw around numbers like, millions and billions and all that. It's like 108,000. I mean, how big a number is that? Well, I did 300 prostrations a day for a year. And that's how long it took to do 108,000.
Oh, is that right? Is that right? Now, I've seen Tibetan monks do that at Bodh Gaya, where they would not do prostrations the way we did it at Zen Center. They would go down
flat on the floor.
And then they would push complete. They would have these things they put their hands on.
Yes.
That they'd push forward, and they'd be completely sprawled out on the floor with their arms extended.
Correct. That's a prostration in the Tibetan tradition.
Yeah.
All the way to the floor. And when you're doing this, David, so first off, you're doing a mantra. You're taking refuge. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Guru. So you're chanting, I take refuge in the Buddha, like when we're sewing, a rakusu or a kesa or something like that. And you're also doing a visualization. And so in the visualization, you visualize that there's an island. There's a tree, a big tree on the island, and the whole lineage is on that tree, your lineage that you're joining, and your guru is on the top of the tree. And so you're on the shore outside of the island, and you're doing your prostrations with everyone that you're connected with, your family, your friends, your enemies. Everybody is doing the prostrations with you. And so you're visualizing this as you're doing the mantra and as you're doing the physical prostration. So it's body, speech, and mind.
Mm.
And I'll tell you what, that year of doing those prostrations changed my life.
Mm.
And so when Khandro came back the next time, I'd finished doing prostrations, and we had a meeting, and we talked about practice, sitting practice. And I had been familiar for a long time. When the Dalai Lama, as I was saying, came to visit Green Gulch many years ago, he had sat down and he gave this kind of, friendly, nice talk, in the first half. And then he changed translators and said, now I'm going to speak to you, you collectively, the 300 people that were in the Zendo. I'm going to speak to you the way that I teach my own students. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to describe for you my own practice. So he went through his daily morning meditation practice with us. And the practice that he does, at least at that time, is called jhana. Jhana. Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah. But
Okay.
look, it's not me that has to be familiar with it. What is jhana?
Okay. So jhana is basically concentration practice. It precedes probably the historic Buddha, so it's very old. The word jhana is a Pali word, and then the translation into Sanskrit is dhyana, and that's just translated as meditation. And then when Buddhism went to China, that word was transliterated as chan, that we're familiar with. And then when Buddhism went to Japan, that word was transliterated as Zen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a thread of this practice from pre-Buddhism all the way to Zen practice in current times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's described in, primarily in the early Theravadan practices. If you pick up a copy of Visuddhimagga or one of the early meditation manuals, it's described in detail. And so I had been curious about this practice. And, since sitting down with the Dalai Lama, I also practiced for a while with a Theravadan monk from Burma that was named Tampulu, and he did jhana practice. But his instruction to me was, just stay with your breath, pal.
Yeah.
You just need to establish your get more settled with your breath. So after a year of doing prostrations, when I sat down with Khandro, I said to her, Rinpoche, I'd heard Trungpa say that no practitioner had been able to access jhana for 1,000 years.
Uh-huh.
And I said to her, I don't think that's true. And she said, yeah, I agree, that's not true.
Yeah.
And I said, do you do jhana practice yourself? And she said, yes, I do. So I ended up doing jhana practice with her. And it's very specific how you do it.
All right.
So
I'm all ears.
Okay. Well, when I was thinking about talking with you, David, so, in part from your sterling example, after I left Zen Center and after I was with Maureen Stewart for a while, and then she died, unfortunately, and I decided that I officially declared myself to be a Zen failure. In your tradition, sir. And so what I mean by that is, through all these years that I've been involved with Zen practice, I think that Zen is basically poetic.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these forms and all this stuff, but when Zen teachers communicate with students, my experience is it's basically poetic. You're not given very much instruction. There are these stories, but basically it's poetry.
Mm.
Now, in my experience with Theravadan teachers, Theravadan practice is like science.
Yeah.
It's very rational. It's very literal. It's very well organized. It's very well put together. And I love that. I love getting, because to me, David, I don't know how it was for you, but basically the Zen Center meditation instruction I received through the years was sit down, shut up, and be Buddha.
I'd
and
say,
that to me is basically poetics.
I would say, sit up straight, pull your chin in, put the top back of your head up,
and all that too,
and follow your breath.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's all true. So in the Tibetan world, that's called shamatha. That's like beginning instructions. Which is great. Anapanasati, right? Mindfulness of the breath. That goes back to the very, very beginning. But that's just the beginning. So jhana practice, that's where you start. So the first thing you do is you settle the mind. using your breath typically. That's the usual access. And the way that I was instructed is, and there's also, by the way, a fellow named Brasington is his last name, who's an American who also teaches jhana practice. And I've done a couple of retreats with him. Lee Brasington, that's his name. Anyway, so the instruction is like this. So the first is settle the mind. And then when your mind is settled, identify a pleasant sensation in your body. Doesn't matter what it is, but a pleasant sensation. And shift your attention from your breath to that pleasant sensation and settle into that. And once you've done that, then the instruction is to smile.
It sounds like Thich Nhat Hanh.
Exactly. I'm relatively sure I never met Thich Nhat Hanh, but I would guess that he was doing jhana practice. And then you wait. And you wait as long as it takes. And what you're doing is you're basically conjuring up this energy that in the Theravada text is called piti, P-I-T-I. And it's an arising energy that some people liken to Kundalini. It's like a big, big flow of energy. But the interesting thing about jhana practice, David, is that when you conjure up an energy and then you let go of it, you don't stay there. So the first jhana, you bring up this energy called piti, that's very uplifting, and then you let that go, and then you conjure up another energy that's called sukha. So sukha is the opposite of dukkha, right? We know about dukkha. So dukkha is suffering.
Well, not everybody knows about dukkha.
Okay, so dukkha is suffering, right? That's the usual translation.
Yeah.
And if you read the old text, actually, my understanding is that dukkha meant literally like the hole in a wheel that fits onto the shaft of the axle. And dukkha is the word they would use when the wheel didn't fit onto the axle properly. So basically the meaning is there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
There's a problem. Something's amiss.
Yeah.
But sukha, which is the second energy that you conjure up, is the opposite of dukkha. So sukha is usually translated as happiness, joy.
In Indonesian, sukha means to like.
Okay. Sounds very similar.
There's a lot of Sanskrit in Indonesian.
Well, Indonesia, from what I understand, was basically there was traders from all over the world that brought all of the traditions there.
Right.
Which is a pretty cool place to be, David. So then the third jhana, and by the way, these are called the rupa jhanas. These are the jhanas of form. Okay?
Uh-huh.
So the third jhana, you completely let go of the piti, that uprising energy, and just settle into the happy energy, the sukha energy. And then the fourth jhana, you let go of the sukha energy, and you're just there. There's also a connection between the four rupa jhanas and the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes that, which is usually referred to as, bliss, and then happiness, and then contentment, and then ease or nonplussed. And in the old text, if you read in the early Pali suttas, it said that when the Buddha that night, where he, saw the truth, that he was practicing jhanas and he was in the fourth jhana. And it's also said that when he died from the fourth jhana. which is often described as equanimity. So that's just another, label that they put on it. So that's the jhanas of form. And then there's 4 other jhanas that are referred to as the arupa, the formless jhanas. So in my experience, Zen practicing, with the breath is an excellent foundation. And if you're so inclined, you can follow that practice all the way through. But I'm not wired that way. I got really bored with just, the description that I gave to Maureen Stewart was, I feel like I'm all dressed up and nowhere to go. I know there's more to this. I just don't know how to access it. And she did, she was a Rinzai teacher, so she did koan practice. So I did koan practice with her. But there wasn't really a description of how to work with the mind that was satisfying to me. And when I found this practice that's called jhana, I felt like I'd come home. It's like, oh, this is what I've been looking for all along. So anyway, I started doing that practice, and doing the prostrations beforehand was very useful, I think. And then after a few years, about 2010 or so, this wonderful man, Peter Lieberson, got cancer and he died. Oh. Which sucked. And Khandro Rinpoche, the teacher that was coming to visit, and I had a chat, and she said, okay, Frank, I want you to start doing meditation instruction and teaching classes. And I said, Rinpoche, I'm not even formally in your lineage. Are you sure you're okay with that? And she said, yeah, this is what I want you to do. So we're going to get together every year when I'm here and spend some time together. And then I'm going to give you instructions of what sutras and texts I want you to teach for the next year. And you can make suggestions too. And then we'll do that. Okay. I said, all right, let's give it a try. And so I did that for a number of years. Oh. And she would come back each year, and I would be her jisha when she came, and we would spend time together and have various experiences. And so I don't know what it was like for you, but the times when I was in Minneapolis, I spent time as Katagiri's attendant, and when I was with Maureen Stewart, I was her jisha, and then with Khandro Rinpoche, I was her jisha. And by far the most impactful teachings that I have ever had were one-on-one teachings with the teacher. That's the opportunity. That's where the rubber hits the road for me. And so, there were a series of events that happened through the years that, had big impact, made big changes for me. So then, a couple of years ago, Khandro Rinpoche's dad, who was one of the heads of the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, died. And he was the abbot of a monastery of 1,200 monks outside of Dharamsala in this little town called Dehradun. And so she came to visit, and she explained that her dad had died and that she was asked to be the next abbot of that monastery. Oh. And it became obvious that she wasn't going to be traveling to Santa Fe anymore. Yeah. And so the last time we talked, I drove her to the airport, and I said, so Rinpoche, usually at this point in our visit, you would tell me what you want me to do for the next year. And she looked at me and said, she literally put her hand on my knee as I was driving, and she said, you don't need that anymore. And that was the end. That was the end of that. So, at this point in my life, David, I'm 69 years old, going to be 70 this year. And mostly my practice is I hang out with, primarily my friends from Zen Center. There's a couple that live here in Santa Fe. And then, my buddy Ted and my buddy Tayo, we get together fairly often.
Tayo, yeah.
Yeah. Tayo and I were roommates together a couple times at Zen Center, at the city center, and then at Tassajara, and we've been really close ever since.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the sequence of events was kind of a long, weird, circuitous route, over the course of, pushing 50 years now. And, when somebody asks me about Buddhism, I usually say, well, I don't know, I'm a slow learner. It's taken me a long time.
That's good. That's good. Well, yeah, that was great. That was really interesting. Now, you said that Trungpa gave you, which the first teacher you met, or the first meditation instruction you got was there, or something?
Yes. At Tail of the Tiger.
How did you end up going there?
Well, I had a buddy introduced me to books, when I was in college. Like, we read Be Here Now together. And he turned me on to Zen, My Beginner's Mind, and Trumpa's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which I still think to this day are the two best books in English on Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was a teenager, when I was about 14, I had a cousin who was a practitioner, a Taoist practitioner, and he gave me a copy of Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse. So that was the first time I'd ever been introduced to Buddhism in any form. And I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, David.
Oh, really?
And my mother was a fundamentalist Christian, which is probably not so different than growing up in Dallas, as you did, right?
Fort Worth.
Oh, Fort Worth. Okay.
No, I grew up in a home where it was sort of cosmic consciousness type of Christianity.
Oh, is that right? Well,
oh, yeah.
It was very different. Very different than fundamentalist, fundamentalist Methodist.
New thought Christianity, sort of mind only. Christian Science came out. It was New Thought, and Church of Religious Science. And there were teachers like Emmett Fox. I think it sort of sprung out of Emerson and Thoreau. It was like
the transcendentalist tradition.
Yeah, totally non-literal ways of reading the Bible and everything.
So it sounds like Unitarian or something kind of in that thread.
It was more Unitarian. I'm not sure what they're in. Unitarian's a little vaguer. No, it was more definite in that, mind is the great reality, and the phenomenal universe is an expression of mind, or stuff like that.
Sounds Yogacharan.
Yeah, So I was really lucky. I call it.
That's a very different background.
Oh yeah, very unusual for there. There were very few. It was rare. We regarded people who went, to normal churches as being superstitious, but we liked them and they were our friends.
Yes, right.
And most
you don't judge your friends.
Yeah, most of them weren't really. It was just a cultural thing, They were growing up in. They weren't really thinking deeply about it, but since then, as I got older, then I meet, especially Catholics, contemplatives, and Quakers, and some regular Protestants who are, contemplative people. And
there was the Thomas Merton School on the Catholic side and whatever. There had been a continuity of mystical Christian practice for a long time. But I wasn't exposed to it. That's
right.
not what was happening in Omaha.
Right. Well, that's very interesting.
So
did you?
Wait
a minute. Omaha. You didn't ever happen to run into Nonan Shawnee, did you?
Not at the time, but I did through Minneapolis Zen Center years later.
You know, he was the abbot of the Omaha Zen Center for decades.
Yeah, and that was actually founded by Katagiri.
Yeah,
when I was with him in Minneapolis.
Yeah,
and
Nonan was
Nonan was a student of Katagiri's.
He was like the foremost student.
He and Tim Burkett, and there were a few others that were
Tim
long
Burkett,
time.
That was different. He's more of a Tim Burkett's. I mean, he wasn't a student of Katagiri's like Mike Port and Nonan and others.
Yeah.
Tim Burkett,
Nonan and Mike were Mike Port. They were what I would call devotees.
Yeah, Tim Burkett was always very independent, even with Suzuki.
I didn't know that he had known Suzuki before Katagiri. So was he a Tussilher in the early days, in '67?
Tim's the one that got the whole Los Altos Zendo started.
Oh, no kidding! I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All these connections.
He was very early on.
So, and then Mike Port was there in Minneapolis when I was there, and then he and Katagiri had a falling out, and he went his own way, and I guess he's had his own challenges. Well, he was always edgy. Oh, bless you.
Wow, that was good. Wait a minute, what was their falling out over?
I wasn't really privy to it, so it would be gossip. I believe that basically that, when Katagiri was getting close to death, he did something unusual. He gave transmission to everyone he'd ordained as a priest.
Yeah.
And I think there were 12 or 14 of them.
Yeah.
And Mike thought that wasn't a good plan. Mike thought he should have been the one to get transmission and to be the next abbot.
Oh.
That was my understanding. And so he left, and he went just over the river to St. Paul and started a center over there.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that, but I understand it. But, what occurred to me when you put it that way is that when Suzuki died, he wanted to give a bunch of people transmission, but he didn't know he was going to die so soon.
Yeah.
And so after he died, Zen Tatsu, Richard Baker, was the abbot, but, he wanted there to be other people with transmission. And, he told me, he said, I'll be going to Texas to start place there. And I said, no, I won't.
Right. But how silly an idea is that, sir?
I like Texas. I like Fort Worth, but that's what I told him. But he was definitely going to, he really wanted to give transmission to, he was working on it with Bill Kwong. It was Silas, Peter Schneider, Reb, Claude told me he was considering even 12 people, and the thing was that Katagiri saw what happened when Richard not only was the abbot but was the only one with transmission. It gave him an enormous amount of power.
Yep. No doubt about that.
And I can sure understand why he wouldn't want to just give transmission to one person, having seen what happened at Zen Center. Although I had a great time. I had a great, listen, Richard Baker has made my life much more interesting. I wouldn't be here. You and I wouldn't be talking. We wouldn't have Tassara. We wouldn't have Green Gulch. We wouldn't have Zen Mind Beginner's Mind. We might not have might well not have a Zen Center without him. So I'm very grateful.
It's totally true. It's totally true. And, David, I realized at one point that Richard Baker, I believe, was 35 years old When Suzuki died and he became abbot?
Well, he was born in 36. And, yeah, that sounds right. 36 and
71,
35,
right?
71.
Right. So when I turned 35, and I had fairly, recently left Zen Center, I suddenly dawned on me, oh my God, what an incredible responsibility for a person to be given at 35 years old.
Yeah.
And I think that Richard did some wonderful things.
Yeah.
And he was a flawed character.
Yeah. Yeah. I've quoted many times Soen Shaku,
Yes.
who was the very strict teacher of Nyogen Senzaki, and
Yep.
I think D.T. Suzuki was his translator when they came to the Chicago.
To the conference.
Yeah, what's it called?
Something, Conference of Religions or something like that.
Yeah. Another word, not conference. But anyway, in like 1897 or 5 or
something like that, right?
Yeah. He did some teaching in America, and he left us in Nyogen Senzaki. But I read a quote from him once that he said you should, and this the background of the quote to me is that he was known for being very strict with himself. He said, There's two types of teachers. There's those with good behavior, and there's those that don't have good behavior, and it's good to study with both types.
That's very good.
Isn't that great?
I would suggest, particularly if you tend to be strict with yourself, you should study with a teacher that's loose.
Uh-huh.
And if you tend to be loose, you should study with a teacher that's strict.
Right. Well, that's sort of the Zen formula.
Yeah.
Always
Indeed.
Look at the other side, definitely. Now, the thing.
Anyway, you asked the question at one point, how did I get to Trumpa's place?
Yeah. Go on. All right.
So that sequence was so I was in Omaha, Nebraska, bored out of my mind, and I had a big epiphany when I was 19, when I was in college. I dropped out of college. I left. I got involved with a group called Eureka, which was this group out of Esalen, yada yada. I was on the East Coast with some friends.
Eureka.
Go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Now wait a minute. Where'd you go to college? Where'd you go to college?
In Nebraska.
Uh-huh. And that's where you were turned on to Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Yes.
And cutting through spiritual materialism. All right.
Yep. And also to Eureka, which was the creation of this guy named Oscar Chaza, who's from Chile.
Yeah.
And some guys from Esalen heard about him, went down and brought him to the States and set him up in New York. So he had a center in New York. And it was kind of roughly Ouspensky-based, kind of fourth way stuff. And it was interesting. It was a good thing for a young person to do. So they had so John Lilly was at Esalen, and he'd heard about Oscar, and he and some other folks went down and brought him to the States. And they started this institute. Well, so Earhart, Est, was an offshoot of Eureka also.
It was an offshoot also of Silva Mind Control, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. The Werner Earhart. I only met him once, but anyway, very charismatic guy.
No kidding. He was, I ran into him at the opera in San Francisco and introduced him to my mother, and he invited her into his box, his suite at the opera.
Nice.
So Werner Earhart was very nice to my mother, and I'd met him before. I didn't know him, but Zen Center, because of Zen Center, he was always very, very good to Zen Center people. Anyway, I never could be critical of him because he was so nice to my mother.
Yeah, right, of course. Well, and that's what charming people do, right?
Right.
He was very good. Anyway, so I did the Eureka thing for a while. They had a training in New York that was, I think, 3 weeks or something like that. And then I found myself on the East Coast, and I had my 21st birthday, and my parents sent me some money, and so I took that money and I went to Tail of the Tiger. And I signed up for a 3-month retreat at Trumpa's place based on having read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism.
Well, that's a good path.
And he was a spectacular teacher, David. He was so smart, and the way that he could communicate in English as a second language was just astounding.
Yeah, boy, it didn't sound like a second language, did it?
No, not even. Yeah, I think he was really a brilliant teacher. Now, he's an example of a, crazy wisdom, you could say, or flawed person.
You bet.
Who, fucked around and drank. When I was at his place, I was young, and he was sitting up on the stage when he would give his Dharma talks, and he was really badly injured, in that car accident. You met him, right?
A number of times, yeah.
He was almost an invalid. I mean, he had a hard time. Anyway, so he would be giving these wonderful Dharma talks, and he had a pitcher of clear liquid that he would drink while he was talking, and he would drink like a quart of this liquid. And early on in my time there, I kind of snuck up to the stage as people were cleaning up the space, and I took a little I ran my finger down the pitcher, and it was gin. I can guarantee it. So,
really? I never think of him as gin. I think of him as sake.
No, it was gin, for sure.
Should have been vodka.
So he was drinking, serious alcohol while he was giving Dharma talks.
Yeah. And
they were brilliant. They were wonderful.
Yeah.
And my observation was, so people were scared of him, but he would ask if, every time he gave a talk, he would ask if somebody had a question. And people would get very anxious and they, stammer and be upset, but would ask a question. And then he would proceed to give an answer that as an observer, I felt like was not an answer to the question. But the person that asked the question was nodding with their eyes wide. And my sense was, there's something else going on here. So I asked him a question myself. And my experience was he answered the question that was behind the question that I asked. It was impressive.
Suzuki did that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Trungpa was pretty magic. Yeah. But
right. I totally agree. And he was a wonderful example of Tibetan teachers that I have known.
Yeah.
And so I would say that Zen is poetic and Theravadan practice is scientific and Tibetan practice is magical.
That's neat.
And then when the magic kicks in, it really kicks in.
Yeah. It's yeah.
But Trungpa called it the three yanas, right? Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. And basically my recollection is that Zen Mind Beginner's Mind, he talks a lot about maybe not using those terms so much, but he talks about different styles or phases of practice that a person goes through, maybe over the period of a number of lifetimes. And between you and I and whoever might hear, one thing I've always been curious about, David, is I've asked a number of Zen teachers, how come, since in the early teachings of the Pali Canon, it is absolutely assumed that reincarnation is a reality. The Buddha talked extensively about former lives and karma and, merit and all this sort of stuff. And in Theravadan practice, right, you've got, the 4 steps: stream entry, once returner, never returner, arhat. Again, it's totally implicit in the teaching that reincarnation is a reality. But I've pretty much never heard a Zen teacher talk about it. Have you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yasutani said, to be a Buddhist, you have to believe in reincarnation.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Now, Suzuki didn't emphasize reincarnation, and to say the least. And if people asked him about it, he'd say he didn't know. But I just think that was because he didn't think that was what we needed to hear. We get tripped out on things. And he was more, here and now guy,
yes.
Things as it is, right? That's one of the things he'd say over and over. Just, realize what's in front of you. So, I had a discussion long ago with Zen Tatsu about that. And Zen Tatsu was, he didn't believe in life after death, much less reincarnation. But, I'd say that, the sense of being an individual, separate self does not continue. But, I think he knows better than that. I mean, really.
I mean, he's studied Buddhism a lot.
Yeah, but he totally does not. He just deals in the yoga, the psychology, the practice, the body mind of what's here, just like Suzuki did, but in totally different way, of course.
Yeah, much more abstract and theoretical.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've always appreciated about San Francisco Zen Center and the time that we spent there, was the classes that were offered. And I've never been anywhere else that was so thorough, offering, starting out with, the Heart Sutra or whatever. I took a class with Rev in the Heart Sutra that was wonderful. And I took a class, every semester, but I was always curious. I always loved to study Buddhism. And then all these years later, when I met Khandra Rinpoche, one of the reasons she asked me to start teaching was because I was familiar with the sutras. So she would say, I want you to teach the Diamond Sutra, this next year. Or I want you to teach, Langvatara Sutra, or, traditional, particularly Prajnaparamita literature, because her students hadn't studied any of that stuff. But I was familiar with it from my time at Zen Center. It was useful.
Yeah, and it was optional, too.
It was optional, certainly, absolutely. If you weren't curious, then fine. No problem.
People could go to Zen Center and not study anything.
Just sit.
And a lot of people
get up and leave before service or whatever, and which is totally fine.
Yeah.
By the way, one other thing that happened during the time I was with Khandra Rinpoche, as she was leaving one year, she said, "Oh, Frank, I want you to lead a retreat." I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I want you to lead a retreat for a week. Here, there's a little shrine room, here in Santa Fe." And I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And she said, "Whatever you want." So I did. So a couple, Tayo and another priest from Zen Center came, and we had oryoki meals in the shrine room, and got up early and sat together. And then I gave a talk, and Tayo gave talks and whatever.
How many people participated?
You could come for as long or little as you wanted, and it was between, probably the least was about 10, and the most was maybe 20 or 25.
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
it was good. It was good. And one of the afternoons, I took everyone to the hot springs.
Ah, yeah, that's good.
And I just did what I wanted to do. And one thing that I started doing some time ago is I like to have like a motto or a soundtrack to stuff. So I had a name for this retreat. So the name of the retreat was "Come as You Are." At the beginning and the end of the retreat, I played a recording of Kurt Cobain singing "Come as You Are." I imagine you're familiar with that song.
No, I'm not.
Oh, go listen to Nirvana's Nevermore album. It's a great song. And the lyrics are basically, "Come as you are, as I want you to be, as a friend, as an old enemy."
I never followed them, yeah.
Kurt Cobain was pretty great.
Yeah, he made a big splash, that's for sure.
Well, I think he was more than just a splash, but anyway, that's just my opinion. You're the
musician. And then you have some interpretation of what I said. Jesus made a big splash. All right.
And how'd that work out?
Yeah.
For both of them, actually.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway.
My God.
Anyway. Yeah. So that's typical of Chondra's style. She would empower people and then get out of the way.
Wow. That's really interesting. Indeed. Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What do you think about climate change?
What do I think about it? It's real. It's accumulating fast. One of the reasons I live in Santa Fe was it's relatively minor here. And I think 20 years from now is going to be the only issue on the planet that matters. I think there's going to be, hundreds of millions of people that are going to become climate immigrants. And it's going to totally wreak chaos. What do you think of climate change?
That scenario I can see. I think, things are unpredictable, but it seems to be that the human race, to me, is committing suicide.
Yes. Well, I mean, you had the Suicide Club T-shirts, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I've thought the human race was committing suicide.
And we thought it was going to be nuclear war.
Right.
Which still might happen.
Nuclear war is a split second away all the time, and people don't realize it. They don't realize it. No, it's very. Absolutely. It's very. You've got the possibility of an accidental nuclear war, which is the most likely scenario, all the time. And a lot of, observers who've been seriously observing this, like Union of Concerned Scientists and so on, just feel that we've been really lucky that hadn't happened yet. And to think that we can go on with having these unstable and megalomaniacs running the superpowers and without destroying the humanity through nuclear war is insane. I mean, but we are a psychotic planet still, I'd say, and we have a chance to evolve beyond this this self-destructive, suicidal stage, and we might do that, or we might not. But nuclear war is something that could happen just overnight at any time.
Absolutely.
A big nuclear war has been very well shown could kill everybody on Earth, all higher forms of life and stuff. But it probably, but climate change is coming gradually. And
that's slow motion murder.
Right, and we're not adjusting to it, it seems to me. So
yes, I agree. So a couple years ago, David, I had a vision, and it was as clear as day. I was not asleep. It was during the day, and my vision was basically that this world where we live, in the spirit of the Lotus Sutra, is one of many worlds.
Yeah.
And this world is an intentional world that was created for a particular function. And that function is very specific. So to go back to Theravada Buddhism, the first big step of awakening is stream entry.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basic shift from being focused on the world of samsara to the world of nirvana in Theravada practice. And so the vision that I had, David, was that this world was created specifically to give an optimal opportunity to persons, beings who are ready to make that shift from primarily focused on samsara to being focused on nirvana and a path of awakening.
Yeah.
And that it was designed, I mean, I'm thinking about like Aboriginal cultures all over the world. It was designed where that membrane between those fields of samsara and nirvana was relatively permeable, so that it would be a training opportunity, basically, for beings to make that step in the process of awakening.
Mm-hmm.
But many years ago, probably thousands of years ago, we lost track of that purpose. And this world stopped functioning very well as it was intended.
Mm.
And now, primarily, in my opinion, because male attitudes have become so predominant in leadership and scholarship and whatever, and that the patriarchal model has become dominant over the matriarchal model, and that we've lost track of that primary function of what this world was for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not likely to return to that unless there were a major disaster that cut the population of the planet by a factor of like, 1 billion.
Oh, that's what Lovelock predicted.
Oh, is that right?
The guy who created the Gaia theory?
Yes.
And he lived to be over 100. And
150 years ago, something like that. The whole notion of the planet as being an organism, a living organism.
Yeah, I'd say the whole universe is, but he was focused on the planet as an organism. You could probably look at the solar system as an organism, he didn't know what was going to happen, but he sort of thought best case scenario is that 80% of the human population dies out, and that
which 100 years ago would have been a lot smaller than it is now.
No, he wasn't 100 years ago. He just died 10 years ago or something.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So if he was talking about
the Gaia
7 billion people.
Gaia was created in the 70s or something.
Okay.
I mean, the idea. And was ridiculed at first and then eventually was accepted widely. No, he died. He didn't die that long ago.
Okay. So 80% of 7 billion would be a reduction of what? 6,200,000 6,200,000,000 people, something like that.
I'd say it would maybe a reduction of 5,600,000,000.
Okay, there you go. And I would volunteer to be one of the first to go.
Oh God! I got a cramp in my legs are crossed, and
I hate it when that happens.
Usually it doesn't happen when my legs are crossed. That's unusual.
I've got arthritis in my knees, so I sit in a chair now. I don't sit cross-legged anymore.
Yeah, I'm lucky.
Yeah, good for you.
I sit with my legs crossed. Only when I do zazen do I sit in lotus. Otherwise, I sit with an easy, what they call it, tailor posture. And that's the way that's the way I work most of the time.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, between working in the trades and doing prostrations and whatever, my knees aren't what they used to be.
Yeah. You remember Van
But
Voorhees?
I discovered you can do...
Van, it was installed carpets, banging the carpets tight with his knees. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's hard. Trades are really hard. Well, Ted Howell had an accident when he was working as a plumber and tore up his shoulder, and he's having a horrible time with it now.
Oh. When was that?
He had that accident 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, right.
But it just caught up with him in the last few years.
Yeah. That's interesting. I have a shoulder injury that I think came from a bicycle accident 33 years ago in Japan. Maybe. I fell off one of those stone bridges. I was riding a bike across down, about 6-8 feet onto concrete.
That'd do it.
Had a little. There wasn't any water, and it was one of those channel. It had about maybe 2 inches or an inch of sludge on it.
Nice.
Because they're for sewage.
Yes, charming.
But it's been treated. It's all treated before it enters there. So it.
Yes.
Anyway, that was the least of my worries. But
indeed.
Yeah.
When Ted Howell and I were doing plumbing together in San Francisco, we got a call one day from Green's restaurant, your old grounds, and because there were these weird smells. And as you know, Green's was built up on a platform, right?
Oh yeah.
Because it was all lower level and the windows were too high. So
that's exactly
so they built up that platform, right?
Yeah.
And
Sam
all the plumbing.
Sam Vanderen pointed that out the first time he saw it.
There you go. So and all the plumbing that was done there, in San Francisco, the code is you've got to use metal pipe. You can't use plastic.
Right.
Particularly in a commercial situation. But because Green's was on federal property, right? They didn't have to follow the local code.
Right.
So all the drain pipes and under the floors there at Green's were plastic. So Ted and I got this call to investigate what the problem was and why it stunk underneath the floor at Green's. This high-end restaurant smells like shit. And so we're crawling around under there, and where the dishwasher was using very high temperature water, like 180-degree water, to wash the dishes, because they didn't want to use chemicals.
Right.
So they had to use scalding hot water, and that water had destroyed the plastic pipes down underneath the floor.
Oh.
And so there was like 2 inches of wet sludge on the concrete floor over almost the entire area of where the kitchen was.
Oh, God.
And so Ted and I had these plastic paper jumpsuits that we put on, to do, a crawl into a space like that. And when we crawled back out and stood there in the parking lot in the sunlight, there were critters that were swiggling on our plastic paper jumpsuits.
Wow. That is cool.
It was really foul.
Yeah, that's good. Good story.
It was good. So they had
Yeah.
to hire some people to come in and vacuum all that out, and we rebuilt the drains and made it all work.
Cool. That's good. Yeah. What year was that?
Oh, geez. Let's see. That would have been. I started doing commercial plumbing in about 85. It would have been late 80s, probably, maybe early 90s.
Mm. You know, when I go to Santa Fe, I would frequently see you. I didn't go often, but a couple of times you came over to Melissa Savage's. I think she
Yes.
she still use Padua? Melissa Savage.
Well, David Padua died, right? You know that.
Oh yeah, I was in touch with him.
Yeah. So she had. I saw you at her house, and I think that she lived just across a ravine from where Upaya was, didn't she?
No, you might have. No, I wouldn't say that. No,
Okay.
no.
Well, I remember seeing you there.
You might have seen me at Joan. Joan. What's her name? John Terrence. I was there at her place.
Yes. I know who you mean.
Sutherland. Joan Sutherland.
Sutherland. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
We might have met there. I don't know.
It could be. Perhaps so.
Yeah.
But it's been a long time.
Huh. Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah, it has. I saw you, I think,
retired,
in 2013 when I passed.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right.
That's the last time. Yeah.
And then, a few years after that, when I retired, I sat myself down and said, I could live anywhere in the world I want. Where do I want to live? What's the next stage? And in part because of, friends and the practice with Kanda Rinpoche and whatever, I decided to stay here.
Yeah.
And I've been very contented with it.
Oh, yeah. Good call. It's a great place. Elin and I, when we came back from Japan, we went there for a year on purpose.
Oh,
so
this is when Richard had Upaya?
No, way before that. Wait a minute. No, pardon me, because I was involved with him getting Upaya. Because David Padua and I were close. And I
didn't realize that.
I gave David Padua, yeah. Well, I drove him to Gary Snyder's house from Santa Fe. Sometimes I'd see him in Boulder. He lived in Boulder, too.
Yes.
I can't remember where. I think this was from Boulder to Snyder's place. And talked to him about that. He sort of gave it to Dick, I think. I'm not sure. He really liked it.
That's my understanding. He basically gave it to him.
Yeah. And then Zen Tatsu, Dick, Richard, passed it on to Joan. He probably didn't give it. Joan was even better than him at getting money.
She was great. She was great. Well, yeah, in part because of all of Richard's connections, like Lawrence Rockefeller, for instance.
Yeah,
who was the primary source of money for Joan.
Yeah, and was very generous with Zen. I showed him around Green Gulch. The only time
I've heard he was a very nice, very, very, very sophisticated, pleasant person.
Oh yeah, he was wonderful.
And Chester Carlson, those wealthy people that through the years have been, patrons of Buddhism in America.
Yeah, Chester Carlson was patron. He was a great philanthropist. So was Lawrence Rockefeller. So is David Rockefeller Jr., who I showed around Kyoto, and with his wife at that time. They've been, and I think Bill, what's his name? Microsoft.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates and what's his good friend, the other richest man in the world?
Oh, yeah. The guy that died of cancer a few years ago.
No.
You're talking about Warren Buffett.
Yeah. Bill Gates.
Yeah, Warren Buffett.
I don't normally space out on their names, but, I've got Biden disease.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, really. Yikes.
Yeah, I wouldn't run for office. But
there's an interesting documentary about Bill Gates that's
I've
called
seen it.
Have you? It's like Inside Bill's Brain or something like that.
Was it like the one on Netflix or something like that?
Yes.
I loved it. I loved it.
I thought it was so interesting. I just, he is and was such a peculiar character.
Yeah. He and Warren Buffett, Bill Gates opened a refrigerator, took out a Diet Coke, and that's all that was in it. And,
yes.
And they just eat hamburgers and drink Diet Cokes and stuff like that.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes, exactly.
But I think I have the highest regard for what Bill Gates is attempting to do with his money. Now, I don't always think it's right. Like his whole thing, his primary focus is climate change and reducing the getting us to zero carbon going into the atmosphere. And he's really put billions into it and he's tried so hard, but also health. And he sees the key to health as clean water. And
clean water.
Yeah, and he put all this money into trying to develop some high-tech toilet that would not need water. Well, hell, compost privies or something that wouldn't need to be. I looked at the thing they did in Africa. It's a maintenance system, and it didn't have squat toilets. It had seated toilets. Yes. People all over the world squat.
Absolutely, and it's healthier.
And I just looked at it, and I thought maintenance.
Maintenance, right? And also cost. It was too expensive.
Yeah, but compost privies. They just make so much sense, and our compost privies in outhouses, but not putting it in creeks and rivers. Jesus Christ! And not in the ocean.
Yes,
Lord.
I agree.
Those are compost privies. I think are far superior to outhouses, but they're something that people can understand and do, and that it doesn't cost $1 billion.
Well, and then it's night soil, like the Japanese figured out a long time ago, and it's really useful.
Yeah.
But you've got to handle it properly.
Right.
But what Bill's really into now, as I suspect is safe, reliable nuclear.
That's all right with me, man. I have no problem with that.
Well, he's actually got a project that's broken ground now in Wyoming about this next generation nuclear facility that produces electricity and using as fuel spent nuclear waste from the last generation of nuclear power generation.
Yeah. Now that Gates has been on that trip for years and years. And
yes.
But I don't think he's gotten it. I don't know. You tell me. He was trying to get, he was just getting ready to open up a facility to test this in China when Trump closed.
And Trump
killed it. Closed off the business thing.
Right.
With China.
So just literally in the last few months, there was a segment on 60 Minutes about it. So the governor of Wyoming, who's this arch Republican, is really, really, really into alternative energy.
Yeah.
And so he has expedited. They are now building one of these next generation nuclear facilities in Wyoming today.
And Bill Gates' his original idea of was to wait a minute. Was to process spent nuclear fuel in such a way that water was the byproduct. I don't remember.
Yes.
What they don't. If they finally figured that out, because he put billions of dollars into that.
Right. Well, and what's cool about it, David? So first off, it's not pressurized. You don't have a container that's under high pressure that can explode, like Fukushima or someplace like that. And the cooling is actually sodium. It's actually a mineral. It's not water that's used to cool the. And so if it loses outside power, like happened in Fukushima with the tidal wave, it just stops making electricity. That's the only downside. It just stops.
That's great. That's great. You know, I haven't kept up. I get an email from him, but I just focus on my work so much. I pretty much say, well, the world will get by without me figuring all that stuff. I finish the thing I'm doing. I really try to avoid news and everything, but I'm very happy to hear what you have to say about him. That's great. That's great.
Anyway, you know, when I was, you know, Ted Howell first, you know, he and I were working together, and he dragged me kicking and screaming into the computer age, which I'm forever grateful of. And he and I are totally Apple guys. And, you know, back in the day, you know, the way that it was presented was, it was, you know, Steve Jobs was saving us and Bill Gates was, you know, the evil empire.
Right.
Which in some ways was kind of true.
Yeah,
on the other hand, as you said, you know, he basically took all that money from Microsoft in to large degree because of who he married, and Belinda dragged him into, you know, being a humanitarian, and he's done some great things.
Right. Are they divorced now?
Yes.
But they're still working together?
I think just recently she quit the board of the Gates Foundation and went her own way.
Yeah.
With her, $20 billion or whatever it was.
I'm sure wherever she goes, she'll do good things. Anyway.
And she's very smart.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. That's good to hear what you have to say.
Anyway, climate change, you know, my daughter, who's now 34, she's on the spectrum. She's on the autism spectrum. She has Asperger's. And ever since she was a really young child, her brain just works overtime. She has high anxiety. And she heard about climate change when she was a little girl, you know, so, you know, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And she really, you know, basically hammered into me, Dad, you need to pay attention to this. This is real. And so modestly, I would say I am now almost entirely carbon neutral, David. You know, a buddy of mine, a good friend of Ted and mine named Jay Peltz, is an electrician that installs PV, photovoltaic electrical systems.
Yeah.
And so we put one into my house here in Santa Fe, and I have an electric car.
Yeah, I have a very good friend, one of my oldest friends in Tucson, who now has their home is totally run on photovoltaics. They're still on the grid, I'm sure, because, you know, there'll be times where that didn't work. But, you know, as battery technology improves.
But if you live in a city and you can have a grid tie, like you're talking about with your friend in Tucson, that's totally the way to go. But some smart people in New Mexico a number of years ago made the law that the utility here has to use that they have to trade you one for one. So if I'm making more power than I'm using, that kilowatt hour is going into the grid.
Yeah.
And then it's like building up a savings account.
Yeah.
And then they have to feed it back to me when I need it.
Yeah.
On a one-to-one basis.
Yeah. Doesn't California have that?
No, in California, it's not nearly. PG&E has their own trip, man, and it's not nearly a one-to-one exchange. It's like a 5-to-1 exchange in the favor of PG&E.
That's bad. That shouldn't be allowed.
Bad.
That shouldn't be allowed. I didn't know
Go
that.
talk to the PUC, man.
Yeah.
This friend of mine, Jay, who, by the way, was just at Tassajara and rebuilt their whole solar system.
Oh, my.
Just literally in the spring work period.
Wow.
And it was, 25 years old, they started to fail, and there were, lead acid batteries that were failing and various things, and they were having to run the generator. So they did some fundraising and got some money, and he rebuilt the whole thing.
Well, that's great. That's great. My friend also has an electric car, and he has a power station for it in his garage.
Yep. Same thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
And he installed it all. He installed it all. He didn't, he hired a company to do the roof, but he built an airplane. He can do anything, but he's getting older. And in fact, he flew into Crestone. I picked him up, and he did body work on Zen Tatsu and Marie Louise a couple of times, and they just loved him. He was
great.
I'll tell him to listen to this podcast. I got out a bunch of stuff here where, I talked to him about hardware and software issues, and I ended up saying that Indonesia's, way behind most of the world on intellectual property rights. And I left this last bit in. We're all criminals here.
Well, you would fit right in, David.
Yeah. Right.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So what concerns you?
Me?
Is there anything that keeps you up at night or makes you feel anxious?
Well, if I look at the news too much, that can, and then I just, I sit every morning. I just might sit a little extra and let that go away. It's all petty, I sort of look at it like you were talking about, that the earth, there's a purpose here for us to awaken, but it's not the only game in town. And if I feel like we're in good hands, and I don't. I think we should do everything possible to, have the best governments and the to relieve as many beings as possible of suffering and do as little harm as possible. But no matter what happens, I think we're firmly planted in emptiness, and it will be okay, and on a bigger stage. But you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah,
I fully agree.
So all my concerns are everything I think are petty. Right now, I just would like to get through this book. I'm working Tassajara Stories. And here we were talking about Tassajara Stories, which I've sent part 1 to the publishers, but I said, I'm thinking of just making an audio book and putting it out now and letting the print book. I don't know what sort of future it has. Let it take time.
Yes. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And when you put out the audiobook of Crooked Cucumber, coincidentally, that was at a time when Ted and I were going to Tassajara together for a work period. And so I was listening to it in preparation for going to Tassajara, and then literally when I was on the plane and at Tassajara and then flying home, I listened to the last chapter of Crooked Cucumber. And I thought it was wonderful, David. I really honestly, truly did. And I'd read that book, many years ago when you first published it. But I love the audiobook version of it.
Thank you. I cut out a bunch here where he and I are talking about some of the work I'm doing, Cuke archives and podcasts and, writing and all that.
Well, I think it's great that you're doing that. And particularly, like when Sentatsu is still alive. When we sat down up at Crestone with the gal and the guy from Germany, what the reason that they asked Ted and I to sit in on these conversations was they wanted us to prompt Richard to talk about the early days of Tassajara.
Yeah, Ted told me that didn't work.
Well, he just kind of ranged over, whatever he wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But, I don't know what they're ever going to actually, because they were videotaping all that too. But, one thing that I thought to ask him was, I said to Richard, what was the first time you ever heard the word Buddha?
Oh, that's a good
one. And Richard went off on this story. So he grew up, apparently their house was, I think maybe in Maine. Is that correct?
Well, there was a Maine period. Yeah, I mean, he grew up. I think of Pennsylvania.
Could be. Well, I met his dad at one point.
I'm not sure.
He came to visit Green Gulch. But he talked about when he was a young child. Maybe it was a summer house or something. But he spent time in this house.
Yeah, in Maine.
On the coast.
In Maine.
And one of his relatives, I don't know if it was his grandfather, somebody in his family had been a sailor, a mariner that had traveled around the world. And the house had these like lockers, like you'd carry your stuff on a ship. These lockers kind of scattered around the house, and they had all sorts of interesting stuff in them. And according to Richard, he was a little kid, like maybe 5 or 6 or 7. And he was going through one of these lockers, and he found a little Buddha statue. And he got really interested in it. And according to him, not long after he found it, that he and his brother had a bunk bed in their room, upper and lower. And there was a ladder, that you would crawl up to go up to the upper bunk level. And according to Richard, he had this little group of friends, and he put the Buddha onto one of the rungs of the ladder, so it was kind of raised up. And then he and his friends would have ceremonies around the Buddha statue.
Yeah. Now there was some point, and it might have been with this statue, where I think they might have called it Krakow. And they were walking around in a circle going, bow to Krakow, bow to Krakow. And
there you go.
Sounds
like you've heard another version of the same event.
Well, I don't remember. I wrote a song called "Bow to Krakow" in 1972. That based on a story he told.
Oh, that's great. There you go. It sounds like it's definitely the same event.
Yeah. That was so funny. Krakow.
Right. Well, and then one of my first thoughts was, well, you don't like to talk about reincarnation, but where does a child get the idea of creating ceremonies around a statue when they're 6 years old?
Yeah. Yeah. Personally, I sort of agree with Suzuki. I think that people get these ideas about reincarnation and about karma that are just, like fictions in our minds. And it's better not to interpret them too much,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it would be better to, I think everything is karma, that you can look at phenomena as being nothing but karma. So,
Yes.
people, there's, the new modern Buddhists that want Buddhism without karma and without reincarnation. They just don't want literal understandings,
Well,
It's the way
Stephen Batchelor, right?
Right, that's
And,
what I'm thinking
Stephen
of.
Batchelor and so Stephen Batchelor, before COVID, used to come to Santa Fe fairly often.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't teach at Upaya, but there's another little Zen center here outside of town, and he knows the guy that's the abbot there. So he would give talks there. And so I used to go and interact with him. And I used to give him a hard time when he would say things like, reincarnation was never part of the original teaching of Buddhism. And I would, pull out my, version of, early Pali Canon and say, well, excuse me, that's not actually correct.
Good for you. Anyway, yeah.
I gave him a hard time about it.
Yeah.
He's a very smart guy, and he's got this wonderful kind of Scottish brogue. That's it's really fun to listen to him talk. But he's made up a lot of stuff.
Well, I mentioned to you that Dick and I were talking about that long ago.
Yes.
And I told him, I said, I cannot conceive of not believing in reincarnation. Yes. I said, but my mother believed in reincarnation. So I remember telling my elementary school principal that I believed in reincarnation. And he said,
Great.
He said, well, your mother believed it. That's the best reason. So, he grew up in a sort of, I think you'd say, sort of atheist family.
Or non-theistic, certainly.
Yeah, I grew up in a non-theistic Christian family. In fact, didn't even use the word Christian, but we read the Gospels and interpreted it all in a non-theistic way, sort of like Jesus was a person. Jesus was a person who came to an enlightened understanding of things, and what all that about is talking about the nature of mind, and a pretty unusual way to deal with it. And
he was a great storyteller.
Yeah, and he said, everything I say is parable.
Yes.
So, to take it all literally is blasphemous.
or at least stupid.
Yeah.
So let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
So I have some good friends that are kind of on the woo-woo side of things. They were disciples of what was his name? Maharaji, the Beatles guru that came to America.
Yeah, Maharaji Mahesh Yogi, but he wasn't woo-woo. Yes. He was just transcendental meditation.
Yeah, but my friends are woo-woo. And she's my gardening guru, and we're quite good friends. And so they started talking about, they knew this person who was a therapist, who is a hypnotist, and that they had done past life hypnotic regression with her.
Yeah, you can do that.
You've heard of that?
Well, of course. That's
Okay.
old,
Have
man.
you done it?
That's old. My mother was into that.
Okay. Have you done it?
No, she read about it. Edgar Casey did that.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I did it.
Oh, cool. And
yeah. Well, I've never been hypnotized before, at least formally. And so, I talked to her and said, well, I don't know. And she said, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we could give it a try. And she was down in Albuquerque. I spent a couple hours there, and I had a really fascinating experience.
Tell me about it.
Well, so the technique that she used was imagine that you're on a staircase. And each step on the staircase, you go back 1 year in your life. And so let's start down the staircase. And she had, she used her voice, the tone of her voice to hypnotize. And I was hypnotized right away. And so we started down the steps, and we go down a few steps, and she said, well, where are we now, and what's this like? And, I was aware of myself being in this room. I was aware of her talking, but I was simultaneously pretty strongly revisiting the events that had happened, in these different time frames. And so we go down the stairs, and so we get down to the bottom of the stairs, and it's like she said, okay, now if you want to, we can see if you can make a step to before you were born, like literally in your mother's womb. Do you want to do that? And I said, okay. And so I did that. And it was wonderful. It's like the cushiest, warmest, softest, most supportive place you could ever imagine. And I felt extremely close to my mother and listening to her heartbeat and all that. And then the therapist said, okay, now do you want to see if you can take a step beyond that earlier? And I said, okay, let's do that. And so I did that. And I was in a different place.
Yeah.
So
describe it.
Okay. It was there was no obvious source of light, and I was not alone. I was with another being, and she was female, and she was glowing blue, very beautiful blue color, and I was very attracted to her and felt very safe with her. And so she was nurturing and kind, and I was a young being, and we hung out together for a while, and she said, okay, now it's time for you to take another birth. And I said, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go there. Don't make me do it. And I was crying and wailing. She said, I know it's hard, but you need to do this. And so trust me, this is the right thing. And so I was born into another life, not on this planet. And I was a very damaged infant, like major physical and mental damage, like MS or something like that. And I had a very short life, and that was that. So, and then I didn't actually do another lifetime, but I spent time with a group of confidants, mentors, like a council that was designing my incarnations and what I needed to learn. And so I asked a series of questions. One of the questions was, what is the primary function of this life, this one, and how am I doing with that?
Yeah,
and that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the answer?
Well, the answer was that this was a very specific lesson that I needed to learn, that I was born into this life with gifts. I was smart and, reasonably pleasant and competent. And I was born as a basically psychotic narcissist.
You mean you, Frank, on this planet?
Yes, me in this planet, in this life, I was born a psychotic narcissist. I'm very narcissistic by nature.
Yeah, you don't seem very, you seem pretty well balanced, and I mean, you've dealt with it well. You certainly don't seem psychotic. I mean, but.
Well, anyway, but I'm talking about, the raw original condition.
Yeah.
I was very self-absorbed. There's no question about that. And so the challenge was, could I make that shift from this very self-absorbed person, very oriented towards my own personal satisfaction and benefit and whatever, into shifting into the stream, basically, to enter into a life of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had a big event when I was, a big epiphany when I was a 20-year-old, actually 19-year-old. And from that point on, that's when I dropped out of school and went and did these various things we talked about, going to practice with these different teachers and various things.
Yeah. What was the, can you tell me more about the epiphany?
Yeah, I could. I was tripping on acid, which I had done before. And I always ended up by myself. And hallucinogens to me are not an amusement. I mean, it's serious business.
Me too.
And so I became convinced as a young college student that I had abused myself enough that I was literally dying.
Huh.
And I was in my parents' house in the bed that I grew up as a child sleeping in. And it was 2, 3 in the morning. And I hallucinated that I was peeing and pooping and puking and bleeding out of every orifice of my body. And that I was literally dying.
Mm.
And, I had various, imagery that arose. And I resisted with everything that I had. And I really was afraid to die. And then I let go. And everything changed.
Mm.
And I got totally blissed out and, filled with joy and light and happiness and whatever. And saw that my life up until that point had been a train wreck and that it was time to do some fundamental changes. And just as I was, peaking, my mother, who was asleep in the room next door, literally just one wall away, woke up, came and knocked on my door and came in and said, "Are you okay?" In the flesh, this happened.
Yeah.
And I said to her, "Well, Mom, I did LSD tonight, and I'm extremely high. And as a fundamentalist Christian, I think you would describe it as I saw God." And she burst into tears, and we hugged each other, and she told me that was great. And what's next? And I said, "Well, I'm going to drop out of school and go try to figure this out."
Boy, you're lucky to have a mother who reacted that way.
No kidding. Oh, well, I was lucky to have that mother on many levels.
Huh.
And by the way, when I did that hypnotic regression, it turned out she was that blue being that I was hanging with. And she and I have been in every possible relationship through the lifetimes.
Mm. Mm.
And at one point, David, check this out, man. At one point, it's like I progressed through this session from being like a little, neophyte child to actually participating as more of an adult in, figuring out, life lessons. And at one point, I was an adolescent, and I was hanging out with her, and I was in a three-dimensional energetic field, all right? And I was body surfing in 3 dimensions without having a body, if you can imagine that. And it was by far the most blissful, fun experience I've ever had.
Have you ever read Far Journeys?
I don't think so. Who's the author?
I forget. But Far Journeys is about conscious astral traveling. And it is great. It's stuff like
that. Sounds
it's got a lot of experiences like that. It's very positive. Don't read his first book, I think, called Journeys Outside the Body, because there he and some people, others who could consciously astral travel, they didn't have any inspiring experiences. It was all like a dead universe. But then they entered after that book was published, he decided to include a sort of invocation, asking for help for higher beings or something. And then there were beings everywhere.
Yeah.
And levels everywhere. And he talks about it, and it's really fascinating.
That sounds great. Thank you. I'll check that out. Oh, by the way, one other interesting thing that came out of that hypnotic session, another question that I asked this group of advisors was, how come I've never met my mate in this life? Which is something I really wanted to do. And their answer was, you had work to do in this life, and we decided in advance, with your participation, that if you found your mate, that you would get lost in that, and you wouldn't do the work that you needed to do in this life.
Wow, pretty good. I've had 4 major mates, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A couple of them, Diane goes
right, of course,
right?
Mm-hmm.
When she arrived at Tassar, I'm the first person she met, and
there you go.
We were together from that point on for 8 years, and then in 1975, when I was director, well, before then, Elizabeth Twomey, who had been Liz Okamura, who was older than me, right? 11
I know
years
that
older.
name, but I don't think I ever met her.
When I saw her walk in to Tassar with Rebecca Mayeno, both of them had married Japanese Americans, and both, out of like University of Chicago or something, and I looked at her and I was just taken by her, and I would go visit her in the evening in her room and bum a cigarette from her, and talk. And when I left, Di and I, Dick and I had a falling out about the grocery store, and Di was really unsatisfied with our marriage, and some personal things. We were still quite close and compatible. We weren't having fights, but I said, "How about I take Kelly and go away for a while and let you have the freedom you want?" Because I was just working in the store all the time, and she was, having to be a mother and everything, and she wanted to work and be part of the Zen Center. So I took Kelly, and I had the car all loaded. She wouldn't need a car. I had a station wagon, a Toyota station wagon. And she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I thought I'd go down to Big Sur and see so-and-so. There's a woman down there." She said, Don't see her. Go see Liz." That's who you like, is Liz. So I drove to Liz's, and we were together 9 years.
No kidding.
Just from the time I arrived. And then Liz and I, the last couple of years, it was sort of falling apart and this and that, and we'd had a wonderful time. And she kicked me out. The second time she kicked me out, I thought, I'm not going back. That's it. And I was at Green Gulch, and I was asked to be, the place was, it's 85. It was in terrible depression from Zen Tatsu leaving and everything. The Rokachiji disbanded itself and asked Michael Winger and Yvonne and me to take over. So I was sort of like the on-site, I'd say transitional director. And somebody I was very close to was Elin Schweikart in the city. And if I'm going into the city to do shopping, even when I was in Bolinas, I'd go by Zen Center and see if she was free. And if she was, she'd come with me and sit in the car while I ran into places and did things. And we'd hang out. And we really got along well. And then I was talking to her, and she'd been with a woman for 3 years, Tia Strozer. And she said she wasn't with Tia anymore.
She was with Tia, really? Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, she wanted to be with guys now, and she had a very, very serious traumatic experience, and took her a year to recover in the hospital from it. And Tia was like an angel. Anyway. She had to go to Taiwan. She was going to Taiwan for a junior year abroad, and she said that, but she wasn't leaving. I talked to her in August. She wasn't leaving till December, late in December, like after Christmas. And I said, why did you come to Green Gulch and work in the guest program? She said, well, I can't. I have to get a job to finish this video for college, UC Santa Cruz. I said, how much money do you need? She said, $125. And I just pulled out my checkbook. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote her a check for $125. I said, will you come now? And she was blown away, and she did come, and Rusty brought her. And we just fell into a thing with each other that actually she instigated. And we were together 16 years, and then Katrinka, I knew Katrinka. I was with Clay and some friends of his. We were going down to the beach at Green Gulch. And I wasn't living there, but we go there a lot on Sundays and stuff. And went by the Pelican Inn. And Katrinka was the manager of the Pelican Inn for 10 years.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah. And she was standing
I probably met her because I used to go down there too.
Yeah. Sort of like from 95 to maybe 97 to 2007 or.
That was probably a little after I left.
Yeah.
Because I lived at Green Gulch when my daughter was little.
Yeah.
For a couple of years, but then I probably left in 92 or something, so I probably didn't meet her. Anyway, go ahead.
So I saw, Elin and I hadn't been together for a few years, and I saw Liz standing out in front with like menus. They were so overrun with people always,
Yes.
On Sunday. She's
Absolutely.
sort of doing crowd control. Like if they wanted to eat, they'd have to wait an hour. Or if they want to go to the bar, they can get in there. And I knew her from the Sand Dollar. She'd worked there for years. And, Yvonne's former husband, Kendrick Rand, owned it, and he and I were close. And so I'd seen Katrinka at various places where she worked for years. And I saw her standing there, and she just flashed at me. I went, And I told boys, you go on. and I stayed and talked with her, and that was it.
Yeah.
So all my relationships, my strong relations, we've been together 20 years. That was 20 years ago.
Well, it sounds to me like, that was a core part of your practice in this life, was learning how to really appreciate and bond with this succession of partners.
Yeah, I've I've pretty much always been with a woman. There've been some periods in between, and it's been great. And they've been independent. They've been very independent, strong women,
Well, the ones that I have met, I would definitely attest that to.
Yeah.
I don't know if you probably have no memory of this, but the first time I met you, or at least ever spent any time with you, was at Tassajara during a work period or summer, not a practice period. And you and I were roommates in one of the stone rooms. And you and Elin were on the outs. And I don't know if it was the end of the relationship or you were just having a hard time, but you were really brokenhearted. And so you were spending a lot of time crying and moaning and drinking lots of Cuervo Gold and smoking a lot of pot.
That might be when Elin and I first got together.
Oh, was that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That was very emotional period. And it was like together apart.
Yes.
And
but you were like at the bottom of that cycle.
That's when she was in Taiwan.
Okay.
She went to Taiwan.
And you were just heartbroken, and you were writing love songs.
Yeah.
And playing them for me about how much you adored her.
Yeah.
And it was, you were like a senior priest at Zen Center. I was this guy, and we didn't know each other. And you were so open and expressive to me. I was really, I thought it was great.
Yeah.
And you were a total mess.
I was in a sort of, not a normal, sane state of mind. When she went
Clearly.
we stayed together and we're just totally in love and everything till she flew off and she said, well, that's it. And, you're too old for me and you're too loud and you drink too much and stuff, but it's been great. And I just cried for, and Gringo.
Yeah.
Norman took over as director. I'd been fairly useless after Elin and I got together anyway. And I was telling Dick about that down at Mayumi's, and he said, yep, we'll destroy ourselves for women. Isn't that great? I love that.
Yeah, well.
but I went to Taiwan.
He was the spokesperson of that, that's for sure.
I wrote her 900 pages of letters.
And
I
really?
wrote about 50 songs. and I went to Taiwan, and we spent 3 weeks together. And again, it was very emotional. And again, she decided, really, we can't be together. And you know what? I didn't care anymore. I'd cut that off. That was all right with me. And she came back, and, I picked her up. I was with another woman the night I picked her up at the airport. I'd been with another woman because I picked her up at midnight or something. And I didn't care. I could just be her friend. I had cut that off. And she said, well, maybe we should just get together once.
And then 16 years later.
And, well, no, that just went on for a little while. And finally she gave up, and we were back together again. But then, so that was good. Then, I was in charge of the kitchen. So that was. She came back. I had another half a year at Green Gulch, and I made an album of mainly songs I'd written for her. And Liz came back and sang one of them because Elin has a beautiful voice, but she didn't have the right voice for that song. And Liz, bless her, was still furious with me. Although, she kicked me out and I didn't go back. But
she recorded your
song. She came to the studio, a big, $1 million studio I'd helped build.
Nice.
And she came and sang this song called "Stupid Boys." It's so great. You can hear it. Just go to. I have artist pages on YouTube, Spotify, this and that. And I have 10 albums, and that's the one called "Boat of Dreams," and that's the album for Elin.
I'll go looking for it.
If you go to diffusermusic.com, then go to artist pages. I
can do that.
Or you go to cube.com and go down to the bottom. There's a link to Diffuser Music.
Okay, cool. That'll be easy.
If you go to the artist pages, I have a World Suicide album. Some of it's old, but I did 5 albums here in Bali of music.
Yeah.
And
busy boy.
That was great. Anyway, so
I have very warm memories of hanging out with you for, I don't know if it was a week or two or whatever it was. With
10
you
days.
just unabashedly suffering. What's that?
10 days, I bet. That's what
10 days?
I would tend to go down there for 10 days in the summer.
Okay. Well, there you go. And you were totally hopelessly dysfunctional. I thought it was just great.
Right. Well, the next year.
See, I would do anything for love too. So, I understand.
Yeah. when we were together and she graduated from UC Santa Cruz. I let her use my car because I was Tenzo in the city in 87. And at the end of January, she and I left and took several months driving across the country, getting her. We went to Santa Fe and Taos, and I drove her to Atlanta again. This was going to be it. We weren't going to be together, but I was. This time she cried, and I didn't. I was, like I said, I'd cut that off. And then I went to Japan, and then she started writing me. And she came to Japan, and that was it. We got married right away. Oh, actually, we just pretended we were married because I was around a lot of conservative temple-type people. So first thing we did was get her a cheap wedding ring.
Good, right. Yeah, and just refer to each other as husband and wife, and who cares?
Yeah.
It's not their business anyway.
Yeah.
Have you ever had contact with her since? Through
all the time. Yeah.
Really? Cool.
Oh, sure. We have a child together, Clay, but Elin and I are in contact. Dia and I are in contact a lot, and Elin and I. Liz died. She died. God, Liz died while I was in Japan. I was at the Ramana Ashram in I was in India, Anomaly, and Liz died of a stroke. And no, it was good, man. Bang.
Right. If you actually die suddenly, then that's a good thing.
She was ready to go because she was somebody who would smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes in a day or skip a day, and she got throat cancer.
Oh, bummer.
And that had really, the radiation made it where she couldn't hold her neck up. And
if she was a singer, I mean, that'd be particularly horrible.
She's a piano player mainly. Absolutely great. She's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful musician, wonderful person. Yeah,
Well,
listen.
you've had some great partners through the years, David.
Yeah, yeah, I have. I have been blessed with them. Yeah,
And it does
indeed.
seem like that's been part of your path.
Right, no kidding. Yeah. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when Elin and I broke up and I had a home in Santa Fe, I mean, in Sebastopol,
Mm-hmm.
I have a beautiful home and loved it. And, you know, we made a deal. I gave her a certain amount of money and I was just talking to Katrinka about it. I said, I can't live by myself in a nice home. And after a while, there were other people living there for free. I couldn't say no to people, and they were taking it over, and so I sold it, and moved to John Terrence, and I was there for 9 years, and he was another bodhisattva. God,
I knew John pretty well. I sat with John for a little while. I knew John pretty well. I really liked him a lot.
yeah, he's great.
But you know, my ex-wife and my daughter were at his place, and when things all got complicated, of course, then there was all this fallout and yada yada. And I heard John's version of reality, but I thought John was a really good teacher. I liked him a lot.
Yeah. Well,
And very kind, and very funny and playful. I just thought he was great.
yeah. He's Australian. He's not. They're
Tasmanian.
Tasmanian, and he's just not puritanical, and
Not even.
he's made a lot of.
Not even.
He's had a lot of people mad at him, but
Yes. Especially his wife and his daughter, and my ex-wife. I mean, when those women came down on him, oh man, that was like the wrath of hell.
Oh, you were around then. I was after.
Oh yeah.
I was after that.
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, I wasn't really part of the community. I did Doug's Son with him for, I don't know, 2 years or something like that. Every other week I'd drive up there or something like that. And we got to be fairly close.
Oh,
And
that's good.
I always, he's a troublemaker. He's a coyote. He's playful.
Yeah.
And people tried to stick him in these little puritanical boxes, and that just was not going to happen.
Oh yeah. He's a bad boy. But he and I lived there for like 8-9 years.
Yeah, you lived like in the barn, right? Didn't you build a residence on that property?
Remodeled it, and we made it.
Yeah.
It was terrific.
Yeah,
and it was giant. It was like and John and I never had an argument. I never saw in all those years him be anything but understanding and kind and generous.
That was my experience too.
Yeah,
without exception. Without exception.
And forgiving.
And my daughter was a little girl, and she was buddies with Sarah.
Ah, Serafina, yeah.
Yeah. So they would hang out together. And my ex, Amy Diller, and John's wife were really tight.
Oh. Amy Diller, right.
Right.
Oh.
Oh, by the way, so Amy Diller got ordained a number of years ago with Maureen, and fairly recently she started practicing with Kathy Fisher.
Oh.
And Kathy gave her transmission.
Oh.
And so about 2 years ago, Joan Halifax was looking for what they called a resident priest. So somebody who would live on the property there at Upaya and, be the priest for morning service and give zazen instruction and whatever. And Joan hired Amy Diller to do that job.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific.
But unfortunately, that only lasted about a year until, like always happens with Joan, there was a big falling out and Amy left. But that's how Joan operates. Joan has
Yeah.
done many great things, but patience and understanding is not one of her fortes.
Yeah. I took Kelly to meet Joan. When he was 19, when we were leaving, he was there in Santa Fe. Elin had already left. This is at 93. She'd already left with our stuff for California. And it was our plan, spend a year at Santa Fe, then we'll move back to the Bay Area. And so I had Kelly and Clay. And Clay was, what, in 93? He was 3 years old, huh?
Okay.
No, he was 2 years old. And
he's almost the same age as my daughter.
Yeah, he's
Shauna
a year
was born
younger.
in 89.
He's 33.
Yeah.
And so I guess he was with Melissa White and those kids. And because I just took Kelly over. And we spent some time with Joan in the house. And, we're sitting around a low table. And at some point, Kelly asked if he could go to the toilet. And she said, yeah, it's over there. And when he left, she leaned over to me and she said, do you mind if I come on to your son?
No, really?
Yeah.
Do you think she was serious?
No, yeah, that's what she wanted, but then she wouldn't have any time. We were leaving too soon.
That's hilarious. Oh, my God.
No, I'd have nothing against it,
But she was probably, 50 at the time?
Yeah, it'd be a good experience, man.
Yeah, it's true. Hey, I love being with older women. It would have been great for Kelly.
Yeah.
By the way, another little weird Joan Halifax story.
Yeah.
So, I was taking care of Shanoa, Paul and Melody Haller's place up in Mendocino.
Yeah.
Did you know about that?
Oh, I
lived there
visited
for
you
3
there.
years.
I visited you.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Because you came up to hang out with Paul and I and talk about retreats or something. Anyway.
No.
So
I just visited you.
I remember David Cohen coming up a number of times.
No, I wasn't with David. I just came up and visited you. I don't know if there was any motive other than to visit you. I wasn't with anybody. You just showed me around and told me what it was like living there, and you were living high. You loved it.
I loved it. It was paradise, man. But then, the Hallers decided to get divorced, and they had to sell the property, and the guy, the rich guy that bought it, offered me a job, and I said, yeah, no thanks. So I'd gotten a letter in the mail from Upaya Zen Center that they were looking to hire a general manager. So I applied.
Oh, you went? Did you go straight from what was Melody calling?
Shanoa.
Did you go straight from Shanoa? Oh, hey, incidentally, Ed Brown lived there with that group, One Taste.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, for quite some time. Yeah, they supported him, and he led them in zazen. Yeah, he's. I haven't asked.
Oh, now see, I also really always liked Ed.
Yeah,
I used to be his plumber. Back in the day when he and Patty were, living together, and I got to know him, fairly well. I've always been so fond of Ed, and people give him shit. And, that weird shit that happened at Zen Center, and he couldn't give Dharma talks anywhere. It's just like, oh, man, I never understood it.
Hey, listen, I've done 3 podcasts with Ed. Listen to the last one. It wasn't that long ago. It was like a few months ago. We go over that whole thing, and I play the audio of what he said that was offended the woman. And it is embarrassing. When Vicki Austin heard it, she was really mad. She said, that is not what I was told, Yeah, all the decisions on Ed were made without looking at what he said.
That's such bullshit, man.
But look, you listen to the podcast. It all came up again recently. The thing is that Zen Center has this woke environment. They want to be super sensitive to everybody, to certain people. And although what they did with Ed certainly offended more people than the one person who wrote the letter.
Oh man, I was so shocked by the way they treated him.
Yeah, but it's I tell Ed it's a hostile environment. You don't want to go back because it's always talked about in terms of like, well, if you do therapy or have trauma treatment, or if you promise you'll be good. No, you didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
He didn't do anything wrong.
I don't know how recently you've been to Tassajara, David, but at the bathhouse
12 years ago, maybe.
Okay, so recently, because I've been going down there and helping in work periods and all that, for pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And so I was down there. I guess it was about a year and a half ago, and the layout at the baths. There's the bridge.
Sure.
And the whole deal and the little entry area there, and then there's
I see it all right
the
now.
altar, and then you turn right to go to the women's side, left to go to the men's side, whatever. And so there's a little placard that's there that says something like this: we're committed to full access for our guests. And so everyone's encouraged to go to either side of the bathhouse by gender, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Uh-huh.
That's not an exact quote, but I took a picture of it. I'll forward it to you.
Oh, please, I'll post it.
And I tell you what, I saw that and thought to myself, that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen Zen Center do.
Well, that's the institutions in general, educational ones. A lot of them in various places of America, depending where they are going through that, and they're bending over backwards trying to keep up with all the ways they're supposed to be sensitive and caring.
Yes, but it's so nonsensical. I mean, can you imagine? You've got a bunch of women guests, and some trans or guy or whatever decides with his hairy back and his dong hanging out that he's more comfortable on the women's side. And that's okay?
Well, I don't know if that happens.
I don't know either, but it's certainly...
We don't know.
But the invitation was there.
Yeah, but we don't know. That Zen Center is so restrictive on who comes in now.
That's true.
This is just, it's just an evolving institution. So that's what they're doing now. And the thing with that, all the people that made the original decision have moved on, but they've just remade it.
Well, I mean,
they
Belinda
just said
was involved, and Reb was involved, and the senior Abbott types were involved in that decision, right?
Right. But it was just
They're
remade.
still there.
But it was sort of like the Supreme Court deciding not to hear a case.
Right.
It just said, in fact, it
stands as decided.
Norman said, and I know this in confidence, to the person who was trying to do it, he'll just do something else. It'll just happen again. And it's like I say, it's a hostile environment for Ed. He shouldn't have to go somewhere where he's muzzled,
True.
where he's not
Totally
comfortable, And he was very popular.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, the Zendo at Gringotts would be overflowing whenever he would come and give a talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and it usually offends some. You know, I've heard him say things where I cringe. I go, "Oh God, Ed, why are you talking about this?"
You don't have to say that. Come on, man.
Yeah, but I don't, and I say this in the podcast, something like that. But I don't say we should ban him because he made me. You know, he makes somebody uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What, you're supposed to go to you should only go to a church where they pamper you and make you feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone, it's always supposed to be nice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Well, it's so nice in Asia. There's just very little of that sort of thing. I mean, there's feminists for sure, and there's transvestites. There's a lot of transvestites in Asia. There's a salon I go to near here that one of the women there is transvestite. Nobody makes anything out of it, and lady boys in Thailand are a big part of the culture, and even in Malaysia, which is very much more where the fundamentalist Muslims are much stronger than here. There's they have parades of cross dressers and stuff. I don't know how they're doing there, but
Really?
but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
Considering that Muslims are not known for their tolerance.
Well, actually,
At least fundamentalists.
Most than Muslims I know are. You know. I was.
Well, but Indonesia is a little different flavor than Malaysia, huh?
But there's a lot of fundamentalist Muslims, and the fundamentalist movement in Islam was financed by the United States through Saudi Arabia to keep the royal family in power so they could give billions and billions of dollars to the Wahhabi or whatever it's called.
Yes, Wahhabi,
To brainwash people all over. And, you know, it's a problem in Indonesia. They've got to deal with that fundamentalist group. It's a big problem in Malaysia. So it's a big problem in America too. The fundamentalist Christians, the same fucking thing.
Every religion, every country has fundamentalists, and there are fundamentalist Buddhists that I've met as well.
Oh, you're fucking right. There are. Oh, there's the Buddhists are bad guys in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar. And sometimes in Thailand even, you know, because they persecute Muslims.
Yes, in Myanmar, my understanding is it was the Buddhist priests. They were preaching that the Rohingya had to leave or be killed or whatever.
Oh yeah, well there are those. You see, the loud bad guys tend to rise to prominence.
Yes.
They certainly don't represent the way Buddhist priests in general felt. They were, you know, what am I, you know, I know people, monks who practice there, and you know, to survive in Myanmar now, they have to be just totally neutral and completely uninvolved with politics, because monks were trying to lead the demand for democracy and
for Aung San Suu Kyi to be let out of you know, home arrest. And my understanding is they were killing the monks that were protesting.
Yeah, they were. But then they let her out, and then she's part of the persecution of the Muslims. Yeah,
I've heard that too. That seems totally crazy to me.
Yeah, so things are fucked up.
Things are fucked up. Well, you know what, David? I will always remember a particular experience. So it was at the Zendo at Green Gulch, and Zen Tatsu was giving the talk. And he told a story about Layman Pong. You know Layman Pong, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so Layman Pong said, difficult, like covering every leaf of a tree with sesame seeds. And then his wife said, simple, like touching your foot to the ground. So Richard told that story, and then you were there, and he pointed to you and said, you know, David over here, David's a little bit like a person who would be under that tree when Layman Pong was trying to cover all the leaves with sesame seeds. And David would be mucking around down there at the bottom of the tree. But, you know, with somebody like David, all sorts of interesting things grow up under that tree.
Huh.
Do you remember that?
I remember him talking about that, but I don't remember what he said. I just remember it happening.
That's my recollection. He was very complimentary to you.
Yeah. Well,
he was also accurate.
I don't know about that. I guess so. But we've always gotten along.
That was a long time ago, my friend.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. I've forgotten about that. Huh.
Well, you know, Ted Howell is you know, we're really close friends.
Yeah.
And he's all retired now. And so I've been on his case to travel. And so, you know, he and his wife are going to go, you know, to Germany, you know, the same time you're there for this big event. And he comes and hangs out at my place here fairly often, primarily to see my dog, who he deeply loves. But anyway, several times I said to him, "Hey, Ted, why don't we take a trip and go to Asia, go to Japan, go see David in Bali?" And he'd say, "Oh, I don't know, but maybe if he has a good experience in Europe, he'd be up for taking a trip to Asia. That'd be sweet." Anyway, who knows if it actually happens? But I've been to India twice, but I've never been to Japan, and I've never been to Indonesia. So who knows? Maybe one day.
Yeah, you know, it depends on how much time you're taking. You know, both those places are worth a lot of focused time. You know, Japan's easier in some ways, and Bali's easier in others. Bali's very consumer-oriented, and Japan is not. You know, Japan is for Japanese. I think it's easier now than it was. But when Katrinka and I went there in 2014, we were there 10 weeks in Japan. We had 2 months Airbnb in Kyoto. It was really nice. When we first arrived, you know, we're in Tokyo and then staying in Kamakura. We could not figure out, well, with me, I couldn't figure out, and I could talk Japanese to people, where's an ATM I can use? Just nobody knows. You know, and people were trying to help. This woman tried to help me. She said, well, the post office. The post office in Japan, when I lived there, was the biggest bank in the world. And so we go to the post office, and no, they don't take foreign ATMs. So a bank. So we went to all these banks. No. And so it seemed impossible. Hotel? Ask hotel? No, they don't know. And,
really?
And
this is in 2014. This is recently, relatively.
Now I didn't go. I didn't go to any like 5-star hotel. I don't in Kamakura. I don't think there is one. It's pretty small. Kamakura is wonderful. If you go to Japan, you want to go to Kamakura. You can walk around there. It's great and beautiful stuff to see, and it's very compact. And anyway, so we had dinner that night with this guy who's well known for working with social problems. He's maybe he's American, but you know he's been there forever. I can't remember his name right now. He's very, very well known. He publishes. And I said, And I told him we had spent a good
How
deal
can I
of
get some
time.
money, man?
He said, "Oh, simple. Just go to a 7-Eleven."
No kidding.
And there's 7-Elevens everywhere. There's 7-Elevens everywhere. And they had everything. They had ATMs that were really good. They had copy machines that were scan, copy, print,
Nice.
computerized. You could download stuff onto them. 7-Eleven. After that,
7-Eleven.
After that,
You solved all your problems.
oh yeah, God.
Sweet.
Nobody told us. Nobody knew.
You had to ask the right person.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you're Gaijin.
yeah,
You're a barbarian.
yeah. That was so weird.
Why would they help you?
Well, Japan's very cash oriented. When I lived there, everything was cash. Bob Halpern was there a number of years and made millions. You know, he had a big language school and also I don't know where it all went, but he said he never saw a check. I never saw a check.
Really? It was always
I never
cash.
heard of a check.
Really?
It
Wow,
was all money. But people are, and even you see in the news, like year-end bonuses, you just see cash being handed out. People are paid in cash. Everything was cash.
Wow. So there's I don't know if you get access to American Video.
Of course, we have everything here. We have everything.
Okay. So there's a series that's called Tokyo Vice.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Have you watched that series?
Oh yeah.
I thought it was great.
It is great.
You know,
and not just
the Gaijin, learning, working for the newspaper and everything, and the Yakuza and that whole world.
Yeah, it's a true story.
Yes.
Well, it's,
memoir.
they jazz it up for the show, but you can read the book. Katrinka's read the book. But you know how I felt about that is that it was very, very authentic. I spent a little time when I was first there in some nightclubs, and you have to be a guest. That's very expensive. Like that place that woman had those guys drinking, they're paying $100 a drink back then.
Yeah, right.
But because of some introductions I had a little experience with that. And, where we lived in Okayama, we're just living in a neighborhood and everything, but there was a big Yakuza outfit near there, and I used to ride my bike past it, and I would run into Yakuza, and they were, I thought that show had a feeling of total authenticity, the way people acted, the way their Japanese was. Now, that guy and that woman spoke such good Japanese. It was, wow. It was excellent. And they both, the actors studied Japanese intensively for a long time.
I think for like a year or more.
Yeah, they were excellent.
That's really good to hear because I had a sense that it was very authentic.
Oh,
I had to talk to anybody about it who had actually lived in Japan like you did.
Oh yeah, I thought, the whole bullshit thing about macho and all that crap. It's really ingrained in the culture. It's ingrained in Zen. And I'll tell you another show I felt had a totally authentic feeling was Shogun.
Yeah, the new Shogun. Yeah, I thought it was great. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful, and the way they depicted the subtlety of the relationships, I thought were just, really beautifully done.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was great.
Good.
And
good. Hey.
Yeah, and again, just really authentic. And I'll tell you one thing about Shogun that was, usually when you have somebody who's a foreigner going to another country and they have to learn the language, they sort of gloss over it and have them learn it real quick, and all of a sudden they're talking right.
Yes.
They didn't do that in Shogun. They showed what it was really like. I have never seen that.
It's really hard.
I've never seen that. They showed that guy learning little by little how to say things, but he still couldn't understand them when they were talking, and
they would have to simplify everything, and basically he needed the gal to be his translator.
Yeah, that's I dealt when I lived in Japan. I had friends. We dealt only in Japanese. I dealt on the phone and everything in Japanese. I do the same thing here, and I'm speaking Indonesian all the time. But it's sort of like him, maybe better than he was. But I can say anything I want. I can get anything I want and do anything. But I can't have an in-depth conversation.
Yeah,
with
any
people.
sort of subtlety about feelings or attitudes or.
Yeah, it's
like, can you drive me to the grocery store?
Yeah, but I can say quite a bit. I can say how I feel and stuff. But if they're talking to each other, man, it is hard to pick anything up. Hard,
yeah, right.
It's harder than Japanese to understand because it's like Spanish. It just sort of flows, and Japanese is more choppy. So your ear can catch the syllables easier.
Well, you are a multilingual character. You're a world traveler, David.
Well, I don't care to go anywhere.
But now you stay at home.
Yeah.
In your new home.
Well, gee, it's really been fun talking with you.
Thanks. You too. I'm glad you suggested this, David.
Yeah, my God.
But anyway, I've really enjoyed getting in touch with you again. Thank you for this.
Yeah. Indeed. Very interesting. Okay. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Take care. It's been great fun.
Yeah, no kidding. Bye-bye.
Be well, David. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. So thanks a lot, Frank Kilmer. That was neat. I really enjoyed talking with you. I wanted to say one thing. The story that Frank quoted, or not didn't quote, that he mentioned, that Zen Tatsu Richard Baker was telling at Green Gulch years ago, decades ago, about it was about some famous character in Buddhism who it was said their practice was to put sesame seeds. I remember, Frank. I remember now what it was. I did when we were talking. I couldn't remember the details. Actually, the person's practice was to cover all the leaves of a tree with sesame seeds. Let me see if I can find that. Nope, that didn't come up. I couldn't get it. Anyway, that's all. Thanks a lot, Frank. Really neat. Hope we can meet again sometime. Maybe you and Ted and Tayo could come to Bali and we could get together. This has been a Cuke audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.